I'm Josh, and this is Tequila Baja. In this next video that you'll see here, it's a compilation of some cell phone footage I took in Michoacan, Mexico. And you're thinking, Michoacan, yeah, I know, we're kind of straying outside the confines of Baja here, but very awesome video, and I think you'll find it informative too. So we went to La Cañada del Agua. It's way up in the mountains near the capital of Morelia, and I got to distill Mezcal with a guy, Pablo Salinas, who's been making Mezcal for the past 30 years with his two sons. Pablo learned from his grandfather, as you'll find out in this video, and it was an incredible experience. Please enjoy the video. First, you have to prepare the still, or in Spanish, the alambique. The still is wooden, and it has metal rings around it. You have to make sure the metal rings are tight on the wood in order to create a good seal. And also you have to clean the copper bowl on top and make sure everything's prepared correctly in order to make the best product. Once the still is prepared and you have that aspect of the process ready, then you go to the fermentation tanks where the maguey is basically has been fermented, and as you see, that foamy substance on top of the maguey is the actual process of the fermentation. That's natural yeast reacting and turning into sugars into alcohol. So that's Pablo Salinas actually in there with a pitchfork scooping out chunks of maguey so we can get down to the liquid at the bottom. Once the maguey is put into the buckets are lifted up and out with the chunks of maguey, and it's dumped into that little copper pot you see behind me where the wooden still used to be. If you see how they moved the wooden still, it revealed a copper pot that is right on top of where you put the logs for the fire, so that's what heats up. And as you can see, I'm running chunks or buckets full of the maguey chunks over there and dumping it inside that copper pot. The liquid that is the fermented, we would call it like beer here, is also put into the buckets and dumped into the same copper pot with the maguey. That all heats up together as part of the process when you're actually distilling mezcal. That is part of what gives mezcal its sweet, smoky flavor. So now that copper pot under the still is completely full with fermented maguey, and here we are cleaning the bottom side of the actual upside down copper bowl. It's very important because the alcohol vapor touches that, so you want to make sure it's clean so you're not getting any sediment or anything that's going to mess up your condensation process or taint it, if you will. One of the hardest parts of the day is actually the physical labor that's involved with making mezcal. For instance, you have to chop a lot of wood. There's a lot of wood involved in heating up that furnace to get the liquid hot enough to vaporize within the still. So, man, I must have cut 30 or 40 logs, giant logs, into 4 or 5 different pieces. Pablo prefers smaller pieces because it keeps the furnace at a more consistent temperature. It doesn't allow it to get too hot, which if it gets too hot, you can actually scorch the liquid. You can scorch the maguey liquid, which will give it kind of a burnt, nasty flavor. As you can see here, one of Pablo's sons is stoking the fire, getting the fire hot enough, and the other son is actually making the final preparations and touch-ups on the still and preparing the still for the distillate to actually come out once it heats up and starts distilling the actual liquid. Water, cold water, is run into that upside down copper bowl via a hose. That is what actually the cool water condenses now alcohol vapor inside the still. We're also at this point putting ripped and chewed up chunks of maguey around the corners of the still in order to create a better seal so no alcohol vapor escapes. Obviously every part of that alcohol vapor is precious, and you want to collect that and actually condense that into alcohol. Once you have enough alcohol vapor built up in the wooden still, it touches the bottom side, the cooler bottom side of that upside down copper bowl, and then condenses into liquid. That liquid will drip down onto a slide and then out of the spout, that little bamboo spout that you see, into a jug. And that actual liquid is what you refer to as, here distillers will call it the heads, or the puntas, the points, in Spanish. So that's the first distillate you get. What's important to note about the heads, or the puntas, is that it is the highest percentage of alcohol that you get out of your distillation. So that yields the highest amount of alcohol. And many times, depending on what you're distilling, you have to throw those out because they contain the most methyl alcohol. The first pot that we filled has been completely distilled. It is at this point has stopped running so strongly. That liquid that you saw dripping out of the bamboo has slowed down significantly, which means that you don't have a lot of alcohol vapor left to distill. So at that point, very low alcohol percentage, you remove the wooden alambique or still, and you scoop out all the maguey chunks and obviously get all that liquid out. And that liquid is then dumped into a kind of a tank to the side of the still site, and actually runs through the earth, purifies, and then goes back out to the creek. So it's very, very sustainable use of water. As you can see here, Pablo's sons are getting buckets of the already distilled liquid. There's pretty much no more alcohol left in that liquid, or very little, and it's not going to taste that good. So you scoop all that out, you put it into that stack. It looks like a smoke stack made of brick with mesh on top, and that runs through the earth and actually purifies naturally. Goes back into the creek, like I said before, and that creek water is actually used in the distillation process. That creek water actually fills the fermentation tanks. That the water is purified and then obviously put into the tanks. That water is also used for the condensation process. So that water goes via hose into the actual upside down copper bowl at the top of the still, and that water is used to also cool and condense the alcohol vapor. Now, this is what we've all been waiting for. This is my favorite part of the process. Once the alcohol vapor gets hot enough, it condenses on the bottom of that cooler copper pot at the top, and then you have what they call the chorro, the water running. So that's alcohol. That's the first distillation of the mezcal, running out of that little bamboo tube into a bin where you collect it. Very important part, you don't want too much smoke. A little bit of smoke rising off of that mezcal is fine, because it is hot. It just did get condensed from a very hot vapor to a slightly cooler liquid. But Pablo explained to me that it's very important you don't have a lot of smoke, because that means you're actually scorching the liquid, which you don't want. So as I explained earlier, the liquid that's already been distilled, you actually dump into that brick looking smokestack, and it runs out into the land and actually cleans itself in the soil. It's the soil and grass and everything underground act as a filter, and this is the hole where it comes out and kind of runs down a little chute back down to the creek, which you have purified water going back down into the creek. And as you can see, there's some steam rising off of it because it's still hot, even when it comes out of the earth. So at this point, one of Pablo's sons and I had just got done hunting. We came back and threw some more logs on the fire. We're still distilling at this point, so it's been all day. Probably at this point we're 10 hours in, 12 hours in, and we just got done hunting for huilotas, which is a type of bird that's native to that area in Michoacan, in La Cañada del Agua. So we were up in the mountains. We shot about 6 or 7 huilotas. We put them on the pitchfork, put some lime, some salt, and threw them right into the fire and cooked them up. So that was our reward at the end of the day. Besides all the mezcal we drank during the process. And hunting up in the mountains makes you very hungry. So these huilotas came as a really nice treat. They were absolutely amazing. Huilotas is, I would not 100% sure here, but if I had to equate it to a bird here in the United States that you would hunt, it would be quail. They're slightly larger than quail, meatier than quail, and I've had quail before. They actually do have a similar type of taste to them. Very, very good eating bird, especially, like I said, at the end of the day after a lot of hard work. And a trip to La Cañada del Agua in the mountains of Michoacan is not complete without watching a good old-fashioned rodeo. This is a really cool kind of side note that we kind of had on our little vacation and mezcal adventure. We got to see this cool little rodeo. As you can see, the cow's not very happy chasing those horses around. It was a lively cow, definitely. So adds to the fun of the whole adventure. Hope you enjoyed that last video compilation. Hope you found it just as informative as I did when I was doing it. Such a great experience. So if you're thinking about getting into Mezcal, or you've heard of Mezcal, or you're already into Mezcal, guarantee you haven't had anything like this. Tastes absolutely incredible. Let me sidebar here. For those who don't know what Mezcal is, I'll try to quantify it for you here. The way I do it is, Mezcal is to tequila what Scotch is to bourbon. To me, that makes perfect sense. So when you have Mezcal, it may make sense to you as well. Hope you enjoyed that last video, and this is Josh challenging you to take in and take on Baja.